Any questions?
During the meditation, when I'm having sensations, I can't seem to escape the sense that I have a sense they're in certain locations. And I was wondering just what your thoughts are on that.
You are not a newborn baby.
Okay. So it's my mind is generating that sense of reference, that sense of spatial reference?
Yeah, you bring your past experiences into the mix.
Okay. So do I just notice that and just as part of that exercise?
Try harder.
Okay.
I mean, try harder to be a newborn baby. I mean, place yourself in. See that concepts are interfering.
Mm-hmm.
Without concepts, there is just the immediacy of experience.
So it's the concepts that create the sense of location.
Yeah, but if I say yes, it is of no value to you because unless you check it out experientially, it has no value.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
I don't have my computer to go online. I have to go online with my cell phone then.
Catherine had asked about a question. She mentioned something that Ramakrishna said, that wherever there are sensations, there is pain. And your version was, wherever there are sensations, wherever there's form, there's pain. And your version was, wherever there's form, there are sensations. This kind of implies that pain is optional. So I was wondering where pain comes in, or even is pain.
Pain is optional with Advil. One of my sponsors. And you think the guru is not subjected to pain? I have news for you.
Okay, then I guess I don't understand where the distinction is. If wherever there's form, there's pain, and then you say wherever there's form, there are sensations. You excluded pain from that phrase. So,
Well, because there is not always pain. There can be pleasure with form. To see that, I find that extremely pessimistic and not very enlightened, frankly, to say that. Sorry, Ramakrishna, but...
okay, thank you.
It flies in the face of our experience. Are you always miserable? No, nobody is always miserable. So there are moments with form and no pain.
Okay, so I guess...
in this moment, there is form. Do you have pain?
No.
Well, I raise my case.
Okay, so a strong sensation, say a toothache of some kind. This is
Go to the dentist.
Yes, I'm referring from the dentist actually. So a strong sensation is a sensation just like any other. Essentially, if it's looked at objectively. But there's the added substance, it seems, of pain to it. I guess the question is it possible to look at a sensation objectively to whereas there would not be pain?
With Advil, yes.
Okay, all right.
I mean, come on. You cannot deny what is obvious. The body comes with pain mechanisms attached to it. And these mechanisms are there for good reason. It's because those among our ancestors who didn't feel pain didn't survive old enough to be able to procreate. That's that simple. So most of the ones, it's called natural selection. The ones who had pain, it was protecting their bodies, and they grew old enough to have sex and to have children and grandchildren and us at the end of the day, at the end of the line. It's very simple. It's not complicated. Pain is a good thing. In that sense, that it contributes to keep the body alive.
Okay, from a different view then, is it possible to have pain and not be affected by the pain? To accept it completely in a way where it is not as troublesome?
Well,
even if you take Advil or
I like this question because it assumes that you have the option not to accept or not to accept the pain. Yeah, I wish I had this option, but you may have it, but I don't. If pain is there, pain is there. The options are Advil, the dentist, whatever, but not the option to accept or not to accept.
Okay, well, in my case, for example, if there is a sensation I don't like, there can either be two things. One, I can sort of put attention to it and really try to see what it's doing, to look at it, which is not, there's not a feeling of turning away. And then the second thing, like at the dentist, I noticed there's kind of a panic, and for example, the pain may be on the tooth, but the legs are tense, and the legs have nothing to do with the tooth.
Yeah.
So I noticed that there's kind of a resistance here.
Yeah, but when I am in the dentist chair, even my toes get tense. When I hear this noise, bzzz, bzzz, then my toes, they go. And that's a survival instinct from the monkeys. We used to be monkeys a long time ago. So the monkey holds on to the branches, both with the hands and with the feet. So when there is some perceived imminent danger, the monkeys. So, but you know, I think that your line of questioning goes towards a pain management course, which is not what. I'm not an expert on these matters. No, there is something I would add, is that when you have pain, are you matter of fact, or are you adding to the physical issue a psychological problem? For instance, I have a pain, I may have cancer, or I may have an infection that is going to kill me, and in the meantime I don't move to go to the dentist. You know, or are you matter of fact, meaning, I have toothache? No, that's not my territory of expertise. I go to the dentist. I make an appointment. I try to have him see me the same day. If not, I change dentists. So that's very simple. You see, so then this added psychological charge is not necessary. Often people procrastinate seeing a doctor and they have pain because they are afraid that it is going to be this or that. In fact, they love the agitation that it keeps them in, instead of just doing the... You know, it's like you have a problem with your car, you know, a strange noise. And then you say, I'm not a mechanic, but it may be this, it may be that, it may be this. No, you don't do that. You go to the mechanics and...
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm looking at it from the point of view of freedom. From what I thought, in freedom, one is also free of pain. Not necessarily that a sensation is gone, but I guess if when there's nothing to do, when there's no, when you've gone to the doctor, you've taken everything, but regardless, there is pain there. What is the difference from one who is free and one who isn't? Because if there's peace, I would assume even the pain would not disturb that. So what's
no worries. You do your best. But worrying is, if you do your best, you don't worry. I think you have the wrong idea about what freedom from ignorance means. And I'm sorry if I have contributed to create this wrong idea, but often it comes from readings people make, you know. So I'm not responsible for what other people are saying.
No. This is from my own thinking about it, because the idea is if something is objectively not mine or not me in any way, then even pain would not really be. It would not be pain even. Because it'd be something like foreign, like something that has nothing to do with me, which wouldn't be pain. Pain is very much me in pain.
ask women who have had children about pain, and then they have children again. The fear of pain is sometimes worse than the pain itself. And regarding pain, we cross this bridge when we come to it.
It was just really telling when I had a very strong sensation of pain, of how much how quickly I was to almost disregard life, it's not even worth, and I saw how weak a sensation can basically collapse everything. There was no referring to the teachings. There's nothing like that. And it was totally took me over.
But as I told you, no worries. There is no need to. You are in pain. There is pain. It's a moment. Everything passes.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Francis. It's on the same line of thinking, but I find that so when I hear that we are peace, love, awareness, and used as synonyms in my understanding, my experience is that my peace is so fragile. In other words, if I am here in this beautiful setting, eating amazing food, and things are going the way I want, then I'm at peace. And, if anything doesn't go that way, or whatever happens with life happens, then there's no longer peace. All of a sudden, I'm driving with a bit of rage or whatever, so what am I doing wrong? How can we be this unchanging, unlimited amness, and yet I'm getting caught up with my characters' lives, events.
The human being, the body-mind, has no access to peace, to everlasting peace. Because it is constantly in motion. In other words, whatever it is that we believe to be phenomenally can never be at peace. Because phenomena are in a constant state of flow. So we have first to see that clearly. So therefore, the peace we seek cannot be found in that which flows. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it in our human experience that doesn't change? And that must be our true self. You know? And that, because it doesn't change, is always at peace. So what is it in our experience that never changes? You know, and it is, as you said, our what we call I, or I am, or our I amness. We use only one pronoun, I. So that indicates that I doesn't change. Otherwise, we would have as many pronouns as there are species and categories of me, right? We have only one I. And we have this experience of continuity of this I throughout time, but throughout whatever. Because, in fact, if we believe that I flows through time, it is not consistent with our experience. In fact, it's just the opposite. Time flows through I. You see, we are the timeless witness of the changing things. And time is changing things. So that's why we call the self, the true self, this also peace, because of its changeless nature. And what we have lost, especially in perhaps in our culture, or in our modern world, where we are so solicited. You say that in English? Solicited. We are solicited? No. We are solicited by all kinds of objects, right? And what we have lost, or lost sight of, is the joy of being. We have replaced the joy of being with the joy of doing. And there is no joy of doing. So real joy is in being. And we forget it up until at some point we have let's say, a health problem or an accident or something. And then we say, gee, I may lose this joy of being. You know, in French we say la joie de vivre. The joy of being alive. But the joy of being. And if we take a closer look, we see that the joy of being is identical with the joy of being aware. It is the joy of awaring, if you will. And then this joy of awaring, which is fundamental, which is primary, if you will, lends itself, seems to lend itself to situations, to circumstances. And then the object, the situation, the event, the circumstances seems to be the depository of the joy of being, whereas in fact it has just simply and falsely attributed to the situation, to the circumstances.
So when you said that there is no choice, there's pain, and there's no accepting or not accepting, then...
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there is choice. Sometimes we made stupid moves. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago I had an endoscopy.
Oh.
In France, the gastroenterologist was my friend, and he was doing them without anesthesia. And it was in and out in like 4 minutes, 4 biopsies. So I thought here, I requested it without anesthesia. I thought in America it's the same. Gee, it takes 15 minutes, 30, 50 biopsies, I don't know, endlessly, So that was quite an experience. But once you are there, you're not going to pull the tube, So it was optional, you see. They just had made the bad choice. But no worries. You see what I mean? It's like you drive, you make a mistake, boom, you bump into another car. So you have to fix the car. I mean,
but does that mean that
things happen?
No, but does that mean that? To me, that implies predestined. Then were we just lucky to live this character that is a spiritual seeker, and we don't have any choice in this life, and things are just happening, and do you know what I'm saying? It kind of takes away,
do we have any choice? Yes and no. As an fictitious, separate person, separate consciousness, we have no choice. We have no real choice because we are fictitious. So, a fictitious entity only has a fictitious choice or freedom, right? So, but as consciousness, we are free, yes.
But then you would think everybody would be just doing great.
What do you mean by everybody?
Then, if we're just modulations, activities of consciousness, I'm sorry, language, I don't know how to say.
Yeah, but what do you mean by everybody? Because here you have an input already, an input of separate entities in your question. Right? Mm-hmm.
True, yeah.
So, of course, if you implicitly assume the reality of separate entities in your question, or in whatever logical reasoning you're going to follow, the output will reflect the input, even if this input was implicit.
But seemingly, I don't experience you I wake up in this skin bag every day, and
How do you know you're not experiencing also from this skin bag here?
I know for sure. No.
How do you know? For instance, because what you were the witness of your breakfast, right? Right? It is the same consciousness, you have no doubt, who was a witness of your breakfast and is hearing my words right now, right? So you have no doubt that consciousness spans across time, that it is the same across time, from this morning to now.
Yes.
Yeah? Yes? And why do you have doubts, or why do it seems impossible for you for the same consciousness to span across minds?
Just because I haven't experienced that.
Well, you have the memory of your breakfast, right? You remember what you had for
Sometimes.
breakfast.
Uh-huh.
But let's assume you had Alzheimer's. Or let's assume you just don't remember what you had. Let's assume, take what you had for breakfast 10 years ago, on the 24th,
Oh,
right,
goodness, yeah.
of November. You don't remember it, right? Does it mean that you were not conscious in that way? It was not you, the same consciousness, spanning across time up until this date, 10 years ago?
I see what you're getting to. So you're saying if just because I don't remember or...
It doesn't mean you were not conscious. Just as consciousness spans across time, and we don't have any objection to that, and obviously we don't make this belief, we don't condition, we don't buy a recollection of an event. Even if we don't recollect, it's okay for us to accept the possibility that consciousness spans across time. And in fact, we only remember very little from the past, right?
Yeah.
In other words, most of the past we accept without any evidence that we were conscious. Right? Without any evidence. What I am asking you is simply, regarding consciousness spanning across minds, to be neutral, not to take a position. Simply to be open to it as a possibility. I'm not asking you to believe that it does. But I'm trying to show you that the argument that experientially, because I don't have the experience of other people's thoughts, for instance, this argument is not valid. I'm just showing you, trying to demonstrate to you the fallacy of such an argument. If we define consciousness, especially if we define consciousness as the reality that perceives, without being any more specific about the nature of this reality. You see, because perceiving is real. You see, we cannot pretend it doesn't exist. You see, even the past, we may be deluded.
But that's the thing. Perceiving is limited by this instrument, you know, like what my eyes or... It's still limited.
Oh,
like,
that which is perceived,
It's
right,
filtered, right?
is limited, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the span, the frequencies, for instance, of light that we can perceive between what
Yeah.
0.4 and 0.8 microns is very narrow window in the spectrum of all frequency. Of course, and the body is sitting. Of course, I'm not denying that, but does logically or rationally the fact that that which is perceived is limited imply that that which perceives is limited?
I have to sit with that one.
I can go a little further. We can convince ourselves that whatever we perceive phenomenally through our senses or through the mind in terms of thoughts, etc., cannot give us any information on the reality that does the perceiving.
Oh, then we're screwed. I mean,
No, not necessarily. But because who is screwed first?
the person.
But you see, but let me illustrate what I mean. Let's say you look at observations made by a biologist with his or her microscope, right? And they look at this bug and that bug and that bug and that bug. And so you have all kinds of pictures of bugs. Some are pink, some are blue. But does the fact that a bug is pink implies that the biologist is a she?
That's good. That's good.
No, obviously not, right?
No.
In other words, whatever is being observed doesn't give us any clue regarding the nature of the observer.
But we are living the bug. We're living that bug, the pink bug life.
Whatever is observed doesn't tell us anything about who is the observer. You see?
Yeah, but then it's impossible to turn back to who is observing.
We go to that later, but first we have to kind of look at my contention, if you will, or my proposal, and see whether there are holes in it. In other words, can whatever we perceive give us information on the realities that perceive it? You see, ultimately we cannot know. Now, going now one step further, do we know that we are conscious?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't know it from hearsay.
No, we know it.
We know it. So we know it from experience, right?
Yeah.
Do we know it from inference? In other words, inference would be, okay, I perceive objects, therefore there is a consciousness that perceives the objects.
I guess I do some of that.
Well, not really, because But that I leave it to you as a homework. If you don't resolve it, you can ask again later on in the week. But I think by experimenting and thinking more deeply, you can convince yourself that this certainty we have, that there is consciousness, is derived directly through the experience of consciousness, an instantaneous apperception, if you will, rather than inferred from the presence of objects, of perceptions. Because to give you a hint, I can say there is a flower here, or there is a consciousness here being aware of the flower. You would agree that these are two different propositions, right? Mm-hmm. There is a flower, there is a consciousness being aware of the flower. So, because there are two different, very different expressions of a fact, these are two different facts, right? So they should correspond to two different experiences.
Ah, I see where you're getting. Yeah.
Right. One is the natural experience. Oh, there is a flower, there is a painting, there is Caitlin here, and there is George here, and etc. Right? And another thing is, well, there is me. Conscious of George, Caitlin, and right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what is the nature of this experience that is expressed by saying there is me consciousness? You see? Mm-hmm. In other words, it points at a different mode of experiencing or of knowing. It's like there are two modes. One we know through the mind, through this vehicle here, through the body-mind, if you will, and we know objects, phenomena. And another, precisely, but which is different, which is not through the mind, which is instantaneous, through which we know I am. You know? Now, it seems to be a very limited channel, as I describe it like that. But not so. Because, and that's second, if you will, because I've given you perhaps too much homework to do. The second exercise is try to find out more examples of that involve a knowledge that is derived, or an experience, directly through this different channel. I give you two hints. For instance, the experience of love, or the experience of happiness. So my suggestion is that they are not derived through the mind, but they come through this instantaneous channel through which we know that we are conscious. And the hint to convince ourselves that such is the case is that if love were derived from the object, it would be constant as long as the object is there.
True.
So no divorce, right? Never, right? It will be once and for all. But life teaches us otherwise sometimes. So there are many among us that are happily married. There are some that are happily married at last.
But all those come and go. All of those have time. You know what I mean? Like I'm not constantly feeling love. That would be great. And I know what you mean. It's a different quality, but it's still...
But it's not derived. My point is, it's not derived from the object.
I see that. I agree.
Or happiness. Let's say you go to a place, it's beautiful, you are happy, you think I'm happy because the place is beautiful. Mm-hmm. You go the next year, same place, same beautiful, same weather, everything perfect, you are miserable.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So the happiness was not derived from the object. The question about the intermittency of it is a different one. Perhaps it's always there, but perhaps we turn our back to it.
Thank you.
She's diverting the traffic.
So this is a follow-up on the similar lines. How do we accept death of the near and dear ones? I mean, pain.
How do we accept?
Death of somebody we love. What understanding do we need to have internally on this? I mean, yeah.
Well, first, the use of the word accept again. You say, do we have a choice? So because we say accept, I can accept or not.
If I don't, I'm just in pain, so I better accept.
So, how do we cope with the death?
What story do we tell, if to the mind or internally? What dialogue do we have?
I don't think it's good to tell stories. Stories are just stories. They are not the truth. When that happens, we have to look inside and see the nature of the sadness. Because the word sadness may refer to two different types of experiences that may kind of coexist for a while, but one is a sweet remembrance, and the other one is a burning despair. And the burning despair, in the burning despair, we are back in the situation of a child who has been abandoned by his parents and who is going to be exposed to the weather, to the predators, and die. Okay, that's the general idea. That's why it burns. This burning is nature telling us, you have something to do. Dad is no longer there, mom is no longer there, you have to take care of yourself. So, welcome to the club. And that's the part which is usually going to vanish over time as we move from childhood to adulthood. So the grieving process is, if you will, in part, a growing up process from childhood to adulthood, where we realize, well, I can live without the support of this person, without this. And the sweet sadness, the sweet remembrance is something else. It is the everlasting love that we have shared, which is there forever. In us, in them, so, and there is nothing to eliminate, when we think of a departed one, when it's not different from when we think of someone we love and we are separated by the ocean, and it's the same feeling. We see the face, and then from this image we go to something deeper, or we remember something, this person, a situation we have lived with them, and then we feel this sweet emotion, nothing negative. That's why it's important to see that these two sadnesses are together, but they are in nature very different. One is related to me as a person, to my identification with the body. And every time we identify with the body, we become a child again. We forget our adulthood. In ignorance, we are not adults.
But what if it creates a fear about anticipating death of people around us who are there with us, but they would also, probably one day...
Well, it's the same. It's more stupid in this case, because they are there, so we better enjoy having a good time with them instead of projecting their departure. But this constant projection into the future or into the past, that also, because we identify with something which is conditioned by time. We identify with the body, and we try to make it eternal, which is not possible. Instead of just taking care of the car, knowing that the car at some point is going to be a lemon, but as long as we can use it, take it to the mechanics and take care of it and enjoy it. There's no point leaving it in the garage, right? You need to use it. It's an instrument of celebration. It's an instrument of, celebration of life.
So no fear. Just let go of it. Because
well, the fear is for whom? The fear is the result of two opposing forces. One is our deep knowledge of our eternity as consciousness. And the other is the identification of this consciousness with the body-mind, seeing it as dependent of a body-mind which we know is mortal. So there is this conflict that seeks its resolution. And it finds its resolution in wisdom. The seeking the truth is seeking the resolution of this conflict about death.
Thank you.
Hey, Francis, I was looking yesterday at the whole thing of identity. Like, do I have an identity that's primary? You know, because I guess I became quite aware of this sort of, I guess, Vishal character, right, with the, you know, its body and thoughts and memories, experiences, but I was the one observing it, so. And I feel like I might be just trying to hold on to that identity, but I mean, isn't there a provisional use for it, for the Vishal character? Or is it just to be, I don't know.
There is a provisional use for it, just as an actor has a provisional use for Hamlet or King Lear or whoever, or Prospero. But it's only for the duration of the play. Then the actor goes out to the restaurant and has a late night dinner.
And when we're talking about the duration of the play, yeah, you can. Are we just talking about like
The play means here that you have to play all kinds of characters in life. The character of the spouse, the character of the parent, of the child, of the professional, etc.
Yeah.
So we play all kinds of, we constantly change hats, and we can play all of these characters, and that's okay. But knowing that we are ultimately the actor, John Doe, who plays all these characters. Because if John Doe, the actor, believes to be Iago, you know, he's in trouble.
Yeah. So yeah, you play these characters in relationship, certainly like human relationship.
Especially because the people are going to address you as this character.
Right.
So you are not going to tell them, I'm not Vishal, I am the self, Brahman.
I don't want to be that guy.
You see?
Yeah.
I'm Shiva, Shivam, Shivam.
Yeah. But say I'm alone in my car, alone in my room, and I'm still find myself, you know, Vishaling, right? Is there any use to that, or am I just...
Then go, Shivam, Shivam, Shivam. Translating, it means I am Shiva for the...
I mean, I guess I'm wondering if there's just a time and place to be nobody.
It's always a time and place to be nobody deeply, because we are nobody. We are nobody and everybody. So that should be our default state.
At all times.
That's where we rest. That's when we are at the restaurant after having played and after the performance. That's our... So, especially when we are on our own, then we better be what we are. You see what I mean? Otherwise, the guy has been playing Iago, you know, he goes to the restaurant with a sword and a thing, and the black face, you know, and
Betraying people, yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
You can say that here.
Yeah, hi, hi, Francis. So, after investigation, if we reach an understanding that consciousness is, I consciousness is basically unchanging and hence eternal, would it also be required to maybe do a further investigation to know that the same consciousness is universal? And if so, how do we do the investigation? Because I see no way to reconcile my experience with somebody else's, because it's so personal to me. So for me to understand that the reality of myself is unchanging and come to a conclusion, hence it is eternal, it seems possible, but how do I reach a conclusion that the same I consciousness is universal?
Let's assume first that you have reached the conclusion truly that it is unchanging, and that it is you, right? Your reality.
Yes.
At that moment you are free.
Yes.
Because if what you are is unchanging, it is always at peace. And nothing can affect it.
Yes, right.
Only changing things can be affected.
True.
And what is true for the goose is true for the gander, right? In other words, what is true of you is true of everybody around you. So everybody is also the same consciousness, not the same necessarily, consciousness, but unchanging and unaffected. It cannot be affected by anything, right?
That would perhaps be an assumption from my side, because I may not have a direct experience. So it could be assuming that. So for all I know, it could be that it's similar to a dream. You know, the people whom I'm interacting may not have any mind.
Yes,
It could be, because there is no way to reconcile that.
Yes, yes. So then why are you asking me a question if I have no mind? If I have no consciousness, actually. If I have no consciousness, there is no point interacting with other people. Because they are just...
My question was actually, is there a way, I can basically come to a conclusion that the same consciousness is universal? Because to me, as such, I don't find a way to do that.
I understand that, but I was trying to simplify your life by showing to you that if it is true that my experience is that I am unchanging consciousness, eternal unchanging consciousness, I am already free. Because nothing can affect me.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm already perfectly at peace. I'm already liberated. So then, if I am already free and liberated, why worry about whether consciousness is universal or not? Are you following me?
Yes.
I am already perfectly, because I have achieved what I wanted, freedom. Nothing can affect me. If nothing can affect me, I am reality itself. In other words, whether there are other realities or not around me, they cannot affect me. So they are as good as non-existent because they cannot affect me. In particular, they cannot interact with me because to interact means to affect me. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
So therefore, for all practical purposes, whatever realities are out there that cannot interact with me are as good as non-existent. I can speculate that there are other worlds beyond the confine of this universe that are never going to affect my universe here. And besides, to which I can have no access. And the influence of which on my world here is nothing. So why do I care? You see, we have to be practical. These other universes are as good as non-existent. So going back to your position, if I say I understand that I am eternal consciousness, not affected, changeless, then I am free. You see? And whatever the question of universality of me is not a practical question, is a speculative question, like are there unicorns on a distant planet? You see, it's a purely speculative question. Because if I am changeless, nothing can affect me. So for another reality that could coexist with me, but not be able to affect me, I wouldn't be able to communicate with this other reality. So for me, my experience is universal.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking this question is because in spite of the glimpse or whatever, I may call it, but eventually, as soon as the waking state begins, I get dragged into this personhood. And during the transition phase from the dream from the sleep to the waking, there have been certain moments where I can clearly distance myself and see that what I am and this body is totally, there are two things. So, but as soon as the mind pops in and, the waking state begins, I get dragged into personality. The reason I was expecting or to investigate to find out the a way to reach a conclusion that I am the universal consciousness is to transcend this identity.
I think that you are already, if you were really convinced of your eternity as consciousness and of your changelessness, the point I'm making is that that implies, for all practical purposes, the universality of it. It was just I was trying to logically demonstrate, prove to you that for all practical purposes, the eternity of consciousness implies its universality. You know, it's a little bit like in physics, you cannot isolate time from space and space from time. So that if you look at the eternity, that's infinity in the realm of time. And universality is a form of infinity in the realm of space. But if you cannot isolate space and time, infinity in the realm of time will imply infinity in the realm of space. Are you following me?
Not really, not this part. I'm sorry.
I illustrate that with an example from physics, but you don't need that. So I was trying to have you kind of revisit perhaps your certainty of the eternity of consciousness, because if you reach that, eternity implies universality. Now, how to get convinced of the universality of consciousness? By conducting experiments in your life. By, for instance, making decisions based on the assumption that consciousness is universal. Or by what we do here during the yoga. Making a deliberate attempt to change the way we perceive the body and its surroundings, to make this perception consistent with the universality of consciousness and see what happens as a result. That's the important aspect. If we make a change, this change we make is going to bring about an outcome. And it is the nature of this outcome that is going to incrementally pile up a body of evidence that is going to give you an almost a quasi-certainty on the level of the mind that consciousness is universal.
Yeah, actually, I mean, what you're saying, I have tried to do that, to behave like universal, and it seems quite an effort to do that initially. And I come back to my default state, which is personhood. It almost seems like an hypnosis of identity that I have. And in some moments, I manage to behave as universal consciousness, in which I probably look at everybody as myself. In that phase, I become love. I mean, it's not that I have love, I become love. So that is the experience I have, but it seems like an effort to do that, and I go back to my old default personhood.
Yeah, but that's a different question. You're going back, but do you make the experiment? Because the experiment, we make it in a moment. You know, in a moment, it's a moment when we change. For instance, we say, okay, we have a problem with someone, and you say, okay, am I going to go into an argument with this person, or am I going to act with this person in a different way, trying to connect with love? And just in this moment, so we make a change. We try to connect with love, and this guy punches us in the face. But nevertheless, we have conducted the experiment. In other words, at the moment we have altered, we have not done business as usual. In this moment, we have conducted the experiment, and this experiment will bring about outcomes. So the guy may punch us in the face, but next moment he's going to have a heart attack and get rid of yeah. Life works in very strange ways. Why not?
Thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to get some clarity about the statement you made earlier about that which is perceived can tell us nothing about that which perceives. So visually, I'm seeing a pattern of color, and so there's no indication that that which perceives is limited in any way by this particular perception. There could be a million other senses, or there could be just anything about this. It could be some other limitless possibilities of perception. Is that a way of describing it?
Yeah. Another example is, for instance, does the fact that we perceive it tell us for certain that the perceiver is localized in this physical space? It seems obvious, people who say, okay, I look around, I pan around like that, and therefore I am somewhere in the middle, right, at the center of the circle. But no. Why no? Because I could have a remote controlled camera here and panning 360 degrees and remote viewing this camera. Or even so, I could, in other words, I could view it from a different location in space. But moreover, I could also record this and view it not only from a different location in space, but at a different time. Right?
Mm-hmm. So if I were to say that this is visual perception, that there's a pattern of color, and I say, well, what that says about consciousness, or
Nothing.
the perceiver, is that it can perceive a pattern of color, that's not saying anything.
Yeah, but to say it can receive a pattern of color, I don't see how it limits it.
Right.
And what it says it can perceive, basically.
Which is, yeah.
Which kind of makes sense, talking about the perceiver.
Right.
It's only natural that the perceiver can perceive. That's the definition of consciousness, the reality that perceives. But other than consciousness perceives, which we know there is perceiving. Yes, we know that directly, as I said. We don't know that through the objects we perceive. The perception of objects or events is not that which leads us to the conclusion that there is consciousness. Because we know consciousness directly. And that's something which is really not accounted for in, as far as I know, I'm not an expert, but in neuroscience. Neuroscience tries to explain doesn't make any distinction, in fact, between mind and consciousness somehow. And this knowledge by consciousness, of consciousness, is attributed to some kind of inference from the existence of perceptions, of objects. Because these are perceptions through which we know that we are conscious, doesn't take place in time. It's completely timeless. It's a flash of recognition, it's a glimpse. Similar to a moment of understanding. Just that it's an understanding about consciousness itself, not about... It's the understanding of that which understands, if you will. The glimpse of truth with a capital T and a capital G is the understanding of that which understands. And because of this instantaneity of it, it cannot be taken into account by any of the models of functioning of the brain. Electrochemical reactions take time. The realm of timelessness is unknown from physics and therefore unknown from all the other scientific disciplines. You know what happens in a discontinuity in nature? We attribute continuity to objects, but objects are not continuous. There are gaps, always. So what happened during a gap? What happens? What happens the moment a woman becomes pregnant? Can she be half pregnant? She's either pregnant or not pregnant, right? She may have twins, but there is no middle ground. That's the point I'm making. There are discontinuities in nature. Either a computer is working or it's not working. The only thing which is really continuous is consciousness and reality. The reality that supports this extraordinary display of energy. If we see consciousness as mind, we are limiting it. We have to see it as a reality of the mind, but not as mind. Mind is made of thoughts, and the stuff thoughts are made of is consciousness. And it is the stuff our dreams are made of. And it is the stuff this universe is made of. So our dreams and this universe are made of the same stuff.